afternoon, everyone. According to your schedule, Cliff Kupchan is supposed to moderate this discussion. I can assure you I'm not Cliff Kupchan. My name is Renda Slim, and it's my pleasure and honor to moderate this conversation about Russia. And my first introduction to Russia was in 1989, when I took a non-stop Pan Am flight from New York to Moscow. That was part at the time of what they call the Friendship Air Bridge between the two countries. I was very junior at the time, just to tell you, I'm not that old. But what fascinated about the country then still fascinates me about it now. And since then, there have been many, many setbacks, many resets, at least between the United States and Russia. And I think we know maybe better a little bit about Russia, but we are still surprised by Russia. I think I would like to quote here Sir Winston Churchill, who in 1939 was talking about the Soviet Union. And he said, "It's a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma." I don't think it is that much of a riddle now. It's not much of an enigma. We know more about it. So joining me in this discussion is our two excellent Russian experts who know Russia, in my opinion, better than many other analysts. I have Professor Alexander Dinkin here, President of Primakov Institute of World Economy and International Relations in Moscow. Dr. Cliff Kupchan, Chairman of the Eurasia Group in Washington, D.C. And joining us by video is my old friend, Dr. Andrei Kortunov. Andrei and I go back to the Dartmouth Conference, right? One of the oldest continuous US-Soviet dialogue. We both were members of that dialogue. By the way, the Dartmouth Conference was established in 1960 at the behest of Soviet Premier Khrushchev and President Eisenhower to create a space where citizens can come and experts and talk with each other. So Andrei and I go back to those days, decades of friendship. And Andrei is former Director General of the Russia International Affairs Council. I would like, before diving into questions, to thank Dr. Ebtisam, as usual, and her team at EPC for this wonderful conference, which brings annually this amazing group of experts and analysts. It's always a pleasure. And as I say every year when I attend this conference, Dr. Ebtisam, as an Arab woman, I'm extremely proud of Dr. Ebtisam's achievements. And I think she's a great model for aspiring Arab women professionals. And so thank you, Dr. Ebtisam, for all that you have done and you continue to do. So let's start with the title, Understanding Russia. I love this title. And I'm going to turn to Professor Dinkin here. So how should we interpret Russia? Should we interpret Russia as a rational actor seeking security, or as an ideologically driven, power-seeking, dominant player?
Thank you for your question. Before starting answering, let me join you in expressing sincere gratitude to the Doctoral Academy for having me here and for organizing such a brilliant conference. Short answer would be that ideology is already behind. Russia is looking for diminishing the threats for its national security. This is the main aim of our foreign policy, as it expressed in quantity of our strategic documents. This is not a secret. And there were many talks about that so-called root causes of the conflict. And one of the biggest causes is the NATO enlargement. Today, nobody remembered the warning of George Kennan in his final letter to the editor of New York Times that NATO enlargement would be the gravest mistake of the US foreign policy in the whole post-war period. It was forgotten. Instead of that, we have end of history, which is totally a mistake, delusion, but unfortunately very well traded, very well traded. And that was the frame for the Paris Declaration of 1990 about the end of confrontation and so on and so, very good words. Looking from today, it seems that it was a great naivety of one side and big cynicism from the other side.
Turning to Cliff, so, and that's a question people in the United States, always try to ponder and ask. How much is Russian policy driven by Vladimir Putin? And how much is it driven by structural features of the Russian state? And I think they ask this question because the follow-up question is, then will Russia behavior and policy change if there is leadership change?
Well, thank you, Rhonda. And first, I think as I mentioned before, I met Dr. Ebtisam at a Valdai conference years ago in Sochi. So if it wasn't for Russia, I wouldn't know Dr. Ebtisam. So I'm grateful to Russia. Putin versus the structure of the state. A lot of it is structural. I think most of it is structural, more than common wisdom and more than the press portrays. And it kind of goes like this. I mean, to a certain extent, I agree with Alexander. I think that what we're seeing in the war in Ukraine is in part structural. I think that any Russian leader who had presided over Russia over the last decade would have bristled at NATO enlargement. It's not Kennan's words, but I think the West did choose to poke the bear, and the bear lashed out, and that's structural. I think where I disagree with Alexander, though, is that Vladimir Putin chose to invade Ukraine. He didn't have to. There are other ways to fight back against NATO. And we all have human agency. The president of Russia has human agency. And he chose to start a war, which has resulted in, choose your number of tens of thousands of deaths. And I don't think we can go so far as to say the war is structural. I think a lot of the causes of the war are structural. Some important ones are structural. Some are human agency, and I think that distinction is really important. If I could, just one point though, I think it is very out of character, even for Vladimir Putin, what's going on in Ukraine right now. I mean, as my colleagues, Andre and Alexander, and I spent a lot of time around the guy. And he's quite cost-benefit. He's quite much of a rational actor, except for Ukraine. So I think that the problem before us, and what is really interesting to explain about Russia, is why Putin stepped so far out of his comfort zone, so far out of his own skin, in a sense, in this invasion of Ukraine. I'll stop there for now.
Oh, maybe we should ask Andre to answer this question that Cliff has just, posed to all of us. What do you think, Andre? Why did Mr. Putin step out of his, comfort zone?
Well, Randa, first of all, it is very nice to see you again. And I'm pleased and honored to be a part of the Abu Dhabi strategic debate, even in this rather limited format. Let me say that I agree with Cliff that Ukraine was a very special case for President Putin and for a part of the Russian leadership. I think it was existential rather than pragmatic. The perception has been that Ukraine is not just another foreign policy priority, but the foreign policy priority, and that to solve Ukrainian problem would mean a lot in terms of President Putin's legacy and his place in history. So indeed, many experts thought that such a conflict was not possible. However, this value dimension, this existential dimension, turned out to be more important than pragmatic considerations.
Let me do a follow-up question, Andrei. Beyond the legacy, Mr. Putin himself, what are the domestic constituencies? Are there domestic constituencies in support of the continuation of the war in Ukraine? Because that's going to go into a long way understanding whether Russia is willing to go toward a diplomatic process and negotiation. So what are the domestic constituencies that are supporting this policy? And is there, pressure being built up toward some kind of negotiation?
Well, let me give you my personal and arguably unprofessional view on this issue. I think that when the conflict started, the perception was that this conflict would not turn into a real war, and it was a small and a short police operations, something similar to the Soviet-led operation in Czechoslovakia back in 1968. And I think that at the initial stage, the constituency was very limited. But of course, every conflict has its own logic, has its own momentum, and its own dynamics. So right now, there are many people in Russia who believe that only an ultimate victory is the solution to the quote-unquote Ukrainian problem. It was not the case 3.5 years ago. Right now, I think even for President Putin, it is not easy to change his position if he wanted to change his position on this conflict, because the public attitudes in Russia have changed quite significantly.
Professor Dinkin, if we can follow up on this line of discussion, so what are the terms of ultimate victory that are acceptable for the Russian public?
Ultimate victory is from different vocabulary, not from my vocabulary. I guess that there are several, they are very well known. This is neutral, with no segregation of Russian population, Russian language country, with certain losses of its territories, according the inhabitation of Russian-speaking population. And as Andrei mentioned, that the mood are changing. The reason of this changing is that we have several attempts to solve the matter. We have Minsk I, we have Minsk II. In these agreements, there were idea of, let's say, Tyrol, South Tyrol model in Italy. Simple like that. We have Normandy process. No way. Recently, not recently, but some years ago, Mrs. Merkel stated that there were no idea to fulfill the Normandy process or Minsk II, as well as President Hollande. He mentioned the same. So this is another root of the conflict. So this is the language, and even Putin, he mentioned that after the end of the war, Ukraine could join the European Union. It was his words.
On the Ukraine and the victory in Ukraine, we know that President Trump came into office promising to solve the Ukraine conflict within 24 hours, right? And we are what? How many months into his term? And it's not yet solved. There has been an Alaska summit between the two presidents, Putin and Trump, and since then the Kremlin said whatever momentum has been generated by that summit has been undermined. And the talk from the Kremlin is that we are at a standstill. The peace negotiation process is at a standstill. Where do you think the United States is going next, or President Trump is going next on this issue?
Well, I think President Trump is, like a lot of presidents out of their comfort zones here. Trump's natural resting place is with Putin. He likes Putin. I don't really get it, but I guess they're both tough guys and strong men, and I think that's where he'd like to be. He thought he could get a ceasefire. I thought a lot of his instincts were really good. Somebody's got to stop the killing. Look, this has gone on for 3.5 years, and lots of Ukrainian and Russian kids are dying every day. And we tend to forget that because our nerves have been kind of inured or sealed over because it's gone on for so long. But this is a real tragedy, okay? And I think that I think the president had really good instincts on this one. It just didn't work. And it turned out in the event that President Putin has been, very rigid. He hasn't backed off his initial demands at all. And I think it just shows how, what Andre was saying, how deeply felt and existential, this is for the Russian president. Right now, and I don't think Moscow really gets this. I had a discussion last weekend, and with a different group of Russians, and President Trump is really, really unhappy with President Putin. I think angry would be the right word to describe it. He feels like he's been led down a path, and kind of tricked. I mean, I think, to just quote the president, I think bullshit was the word that he used to describe President Putin's, substance of his negotiations. And right now, much to my surprise, I think to President Trump's own surprise, he's moving in behind the Ukrainian position. Mm-hmm. And I think the Russians ought to smell the coffee here. The sanctioning of Rosneft and Lukoil, if enforced, it's technical, but if secondary sanctions are enforced, if India and China, potentially, probably not China, but if those companies get shut down, Russia really gets hurt economically. Yes. And global oil, actually, I mean, we'd see a profound spike. Some in this country might benefit, but for all the wrong reasons, we'd see oil at 65 or higher. So I think the trend line on Trump right now is pro-Ukraine, and is really a problem for Russia. And I hope that message kind of gets out, because I don't think it's really clear yet.
But then let me do a follow-up question.
Sure.
So how much can Western support for Ukraine be sustained if the diplomatic process is stalled? How longer? How long can it be sustained? I mean, Europe, I think, has no choice, but with the U.S. and Trump...
Well, I think that what we're seeing right now is kind of a ceiling on Western support. Trump's not going to do a new appropriation, but I think he'll continue intelligence support, which is critical for a lot of reasons. I think he'll continue to let the Europeans buy and facilitate European purchases. And my own view is that over time, as Europe ramps up, that the Europe-Ukraine combination will be a real problem. I think this can go on for a long time. And that is my concern, that with President Putin's views and with European resolve, that this war could go on for another 5 or 10 years. And I think that's what we're looking at.
Andre, let's move to China. And how would you characterize the China-Russia relationship? An alliance, a partnership, or a marriage of convenience? Or all of the above?
Well, it is definitely not an alliance. Neither China nor Russia is ready to go for a formal military and political alliance with very specific commitments. I think that both nations value the flexibility that they now enjoy, and they're not ready to compromise this flexibility. They might even disagree on some very important issues. For instance, Cliff mentioned India. Russia and China disagree on India in many significant ways, and they agree to disagree. So I don't think that an alliance is the right word to use when we talk about relations between Beijing and Moscow. At the same time, I don't think that it is a marriage of convenience. Maybe it started as such a marriage 20 or 25 years ago, but today I think it is fair to say that we do have a strategic partnership between Moscow and Beijing. It is much deeper than just a tactical alliance. And it is not something that is generated by their mutual resistance to the pressure from the West. I think these are two big countries. They share a long common border. Their economies are mutually complementary, so it is only natural for them to work together not just on tactical issues, but also on some strategic ones. There are problems in this relationship. There are wrinkles that have to be ironed out. But nevertheless, we see that this relationship has a positive dynamics, and there is a lot of potential there, no doubt about that.
Professor Dinkin, how does the Russian public and Russian elites view this relationship, dependence between China and Russia?
Well, the short answer is that Russians do not thinking that we are dependent. Because in certain military technology, we still are more advanced than they are. I could mention them. So they consider this relation as a partnership support during the hard time for Russia. This is an attitude. And in this regard, the Russians are thankful for China. And recently now we are open to free visa traveling, because before it was mainly relations between political leaders. Today it starts relations on the society, on the grassroots levels, on the cultural level, very strong cooperation and very strong exchange. So people consider it positively.
So they are not concerned about this kind of partnership strengthening Chinese dominance?
Well, it's strengthening both countries. And some lovers of German cars, they of course suspicious about Chinese cars, but they use them.
Cliff, how sustainable do you think is Russian pivot to China economically? I mean, can China absorb what Europe once did from Russia?
How sustainable is the pivot to China?
Economically.
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 I think that depends in part on China. Russia is a very junior partner in the relationship. Russia is especially in an economic sense. Will China agree to this big new gas pipeline, the Power of Siberia pipeline? So far, no. I think Russia needs a lot from China, and it depends on China's comfort zone long term as to whether there'll be enough in it for China to make to make it a long-term relationship, whether it's an alliance or a close partnership. But I could just want on another point, just real quickly. I just wanted to offer this, throw this out there, and I offer it with humility because I'm with two Russians and I'm not a Russian. But on the issue of constituencies, because I think we're here to understand Russia. I think it pervades a lot of Russian foreign policy and Putin and what's going on. To me, I think it's important to understand, at least my understanding, having spent a lot of time my whole career, studying Russia. It's a quite conservative population, especially when you get outside of Moscow, where I've been to 56, I think, of the 85 regions for a lot of complicated reasons. It's a very, very conservative population. And I think it's a population I refer to as the silent majority in Russia, that I think supports the policy towards Ukraine. It's quite comfortable with the relationship with China. Is one of kind of conservative Christian values, which we can get into in a different context. But I think a big legitimizing factor of what we're seeing across the board and what we're talking about is a population that is pretty much on board with what the Russian president's doing. And to me, that's important in context.
Let me follow up shortly.
Please.
Look, my contact among Chinese experts gives me the take that they pay great attention to the terrorist attack against Nord Stream 2. Why? Because China is an energy-dependent country. Approximately 90% of the crude it received by the sea. And they remind me that Malacca Strait in the narrow part is only 2.5 kilometers wide. And they paying attention to this reality because the Chinese strategy is oriented toward long horizons, much longer than Russian maybe. And they consider this as a challenge for them. So this is the reason of the this new gas pipe. This is the reason of China's interest in the North Arctic route, and so on and so forth. This is driven by attempt to be energy independent for Beijing.
Andrei, how does Moscow look at China's BRI, especially as it applies to Central Asia? Is it, I mean, I've noticed that they have been, trying as much as possible not to engage in confrontation with that policy. I mean, how is Moscow's standpoint on this, especially as it applies to Central Asia?
Well, my take is that when we talk about Central Asia, the major concern in Moscow is not China, but a potential rise of Islamic fundamentalism. For instance, an implosion of Afghanistan and a spillover effect on Central Asian nations, because such a development can have direct impact on Russia proper, on the Muslim regions of the Russian Federation, and definitely it is a major security concern that Russia has. And the other concern is the Western influence in Central Asia, which is perceived as much more dangerous in terms of Russia's interests than a potential advancement of China. As far as China is concerned, of course, there is a degree of competition between the two nations in Central Asia, but I would venture to say that China plays its card there in a very smart way, in my view, because China always recognizes the strategic leadership of Russia on security matters in Central Asia. It consults with Moscow on its major initiatives in the region, and moreover, China is always ready to engage into multilateral projects in Central Asia together with Moscow. For instance, this is one of the priorities of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So I don't see that there is a lot of anxiety about China's role in Central Asia, though, as I mentioned, there is a competition between Russian and Chinese companies in certain sectors. And if you take energy in particular, definitely Russia and major Central Asian nations are competitors fighting for the Chinese market. So there is a degree of competition there.
Thank you. Professor Dinkin, let's move to the Arctic. How does the Arctic fit into Russia's broader foreign policy objectives?
Well, I guess during recent 10 years, there is growing understanding that this northern pass is important for Russian future, for Russian economy, because, as you know, this fragmentation of the global economy substantially influenced logistics. The freight through the Suez Channel is going down. Its Red Sea is not very safe,
stable,
and so on and so forth. So we are facing the climate change, so it would increase the length of free waters over there. But still, we need to make certain investments in the ports over there, because currently it works like supply of mainly gas, coal to the Asian markets. But it has to be both ways, and the dream is to organize the cargo transit through this northern pass.
So, building on what Professor Dinkin has said, I mean, do you think, Cliff, that Russia sees the Arctic as a zone of competition or a zone of potential cooperation? And the question, who is going to cooperate with Russia in the Arctic?
Well, first let me point out, Rhonda, that since we've left the topic of Ukraine, we're talking about a country that views foreign policy in terms of nation-state interests, in terms of influence and economic gain. That the ideological wild card third rail thing is kind of gone. I mean, we're kind of back in Kenneth Waltz land and out of whatever you want to, Never Land, and it's different. Okay, so with that said, I think Russia, because it's such a, wildly, obviously Arctic state, views itself as kind of the first among equals, but among equals. I haven't seen anything way out of whack in Russia's Arctic policy. I mean, what is about the northern shipping route, which is, as the world melts, really relevant. It's about, well, nuclear deterrence for the Northern Fleet. It's about oil and gas resource extraction. It's about critical minerals. And those are all kind of really normal things. Russia, to my mind, had a track record of real cooperation through the Arctic Council. I think Russia's still participating, suspended, a non-voting member, some kind of really reduced participation. So because of the Ukraine war, it's probably less of a cooperative win-win kind of situation than I think it's been historically. But if this war ends, I think we'll go back to a more functional, cooperative relationship with other Arctic states and maybe even with the United States in the region.
So how does the United States right now, how does Washington, D.C. today view Russia's policy?
In the Arctic?
Yeah.
Well, from Biden to Trump, there's no view of anything that Russia does. They're not, even New START. I mean, President Putin offered to extend New START for a year. No response yet from Trump. So U.S. policy is really not to engage Russia on anything, which I think is a big mistake, but a different topic.
So again, I mean, going back to the relationship between Russia and the U.S., again, as I said, over so many years, I've been dealing with Russia as an analyst, and it reminds me of another French saying: "Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose." It changes, and then we are back to the same thing. It changes, and then we are back to the same thing. So how should the West deal with Russia? I mean, we have tried deterrence, we have tried dialogue, right? What are the best strategies for dealing with Russia?
Well, in my view, the main thing the Trump administration could have done, should have done, and might do, something the Russians want, but I think makes a lot of sense. There's no skin off the U.S. back, which is to, while figuring out a solution to the war in Ukraine, engage Russia on strategic arms control, on strategic stability, tentatively on economic issues. There was a reference in the previous panel to begin to envision what European security could look like so that everybody feels safe. It's not to talk to Russia is a lose-lose. And the U.S. has succeeded in losing for the past 5 years, and I think will continue to lose. But that's what we can do, and it's not, doesn't take a nuclear scientist to figure that out, but we're just not doing it.
But there's no political will in either country to engage in this?
There's no
There are more, how to say, inhibitors, or, I mean, there are less facilitators for this kind of engagement.
My own view, and, I'm no big supporter of my president, but I think his instincts on this are right. I think left to his own, he would have begun more of these discussions. There's just no political payoff in the United States. I mean, from, Marco Rubio, I don't know about Hegseth, but Rubio has been one of the leading Russia hawks in the Senate. He's just a huge hawk. And, Marco Rubio is a hugely ascending stock in the U.S. political. I mean, he's the guy who has really played the system well. He's got 2 hats right now. He's very close to Trump. I mean, he's gone from being little Marco to one hell of a big Secretary of State. And he's incredibly influential. So I don't think it's a political payoff, and I don't think anybody around Trump's telling him to deal with Russia.
May I follow
yes,
up
please,
shortly
and then I'm going
again?
to ask Andrei the same question. Please
The biggest change in the White House after Trump is that before the last Minister of Defense, today we have Minister of War, the last Minister of Defense slogan was strategic defeat to Russia, which Europe repeat with a joy. Today the narrative completely different. The second issue, values. Mr. Trump is not great fan of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. He is not great fan of BLM, of green hysteria, and so on and so forth. And that matching, that fits to the Russian traditional values.
Andrei, would you like to chime in into this conversation? How can we, shape this relationship going forward? What are the better means to shape it?
Well, first of all, I think that we should not underestimate the resilience of the anti-Russian consensus in the United States, which is strong, which is broad, and which doesn't depend on a particular administration or particular composition of the US Congress. Second, I think that the old basis for the relationship, which historically has been strategic arms control, is being eroded. And I doubt very much that we will be in a position to restore it. And we have to look for a new foundation of the relationship. And I think that we should look for this foundation, keeping in mind that both countries will be mostly inward-oriented in years to come, that they will both be focused on their domestic agendas. So we should look at where these two agendas might overlap. For instance, the United States is concerned about reindustrialization, but this is also a concern for Russia and for the Russian leadership. The United States is concerned about migrations, and again, this is not something which is alien to Russia. We can talk about urban decay, we can talk about violent crime, we can talk about many issues where domestic agendas of the two nations might overlap. And this is exactly where we should look for common interests and for new constituencies of potential stakeholders that might broaden the foundation for cooperation. It will take a lot of time. It will not happen overnight. It will not probably happen under this president. But looking into the future, we should definitely look for a new base that should make this relationship more predictable, more stable, and ultimately more productive for both nations. Otherwise, we are doomed to stay as adversaries, even if there is no specific clash of interests between Moscow and Washington, because, of course, the inertia of the Cold War, the genetic memory is still there, and it will not fade away easily.
Andrei, you and I have been members of, a long-standing US-Russia Middle East dialogue, right? And we are always looking for areas of convergence between the two countries in the Middle East. Syria was always especially in the last few years, since at least 2016, Syria has been one of the topics we talked about in our track 1.5, track 2 dialogue. So Mr. Al-Shari' visited Moscow recently. What can you say about that visit? What were the outcomes of it? And what is Russia's policy in Syria going forward?
Well, I think it's very clear. The Syrian leadership is very pragmatic. They understand that they need Russia. They need Russia economically as a major trade partner of Syria. They need Russia politically as a balance against other powers that claim influence in Syria. And on the other side, Russia is clearly interested in preserving its military presence in Syria, specifically the two bases, not for operations in Syria proper, but as transportation hubs, as transit points to project Russia's power to other regions, specifically to Northern and Central Africa. So there is an overlap of interests. It doesn't mean that there will be no problems between Damascus and Moscow. I can see many problems along the road. It will be a bumpy road for many reasons. But if we get back to the US-Russian relations in this particular region, I think one of the problems is that if you look at Russia from the White House, it is a part of the problem, not a part of the solution for Middle East. And I think, Trump does not see any specific role that Russia might play in Syria or beyond. And I think this is an omission. Definitely Russia and the United States might work together, at least on some issues related to Middle East. And I think this is something that has to be explored further.
Professor Lincoln, looking at another part of the world where Russia is also having a major footprint is Africa. And so how does Africa fit into this, to Russia's global pivot, if we can put it this way, to the global south?
There are several reasons. One is completely splitting relations with Europe and some power of foreign policy also free for Africa. And everybody understood that this is the continent of the future. And there is the only place where the population is still going to grow. It's abundant natural resources. And we still have some, let's say, African leaders who possess good memory about relations with the Soviet Union. This is sort of capital which start to be used maybe a bit late, but it's a necessary step, I guess.
And is this kind of capital that is going to be sustainable, or is it primarily extractive, short-term policies?
I'm sure that it would be a long-term policy. It's depending for, let's say, our capacity, our resources, which is supposed to be freed from this terrible war, and then they would devote it to other targets.
And how does China look at this, at Russia's footprint in Africa? How does it come up in the discussion between Russia and China?
China is much more ahead in dealing with Africa than we. So sometimes they gave us some advices, but as Andreas said, we try to avoid competition in Central Asia. So the same policy would be in Africa. My formula about Russian-Chinese relation, never against each other, not always together.
Cliff, so you have a foot in, of course, in the US, but also you are a Russia analyst, long-time Russia analyst. How you think the Russians' approach in Africa different from from Western engagement with Africa?
Russia versus the West in Africa?
Yes. How does it differ?
Oh boy. I think Russia, look, I ran the Africa subcommittee, the House International Relations Committee for 2 years. And it's just incredibly hard to get anybody in the United States to really care about Africa.
Excuse me, can you repeat
it's
the last?
It's incredibly hard to get elites in the United States to care about Africa.
Yes.
Unless they're specialists in Africa, you just have to do all sorts of things to get their attention. I think Russia has identified interests in Africa, from arms sales to extractive interests to just displacing the French in the Sahel. It's been turned from Wagner to the Africa Corps to the Ministry of Defense, but they're pretty good at it, and behind the Chinese, as Alexander said, but considerably ahead of the U.S. And I don't think that's going to change. It's a huge market that the U.S. really isn't going to play in.
Randa,
please, you can add, and then I want to ask you a question on this also.
I just wanted to add that if you take Africa and some other parts of the world, and if you take the economic dimension of foreign engagement, Russia is clearly different from other major external players, because if you take Europe, if you take China, and to some extent even the United States, all of these powers are interested in extracting resources from Africa, be it oil or gas or gold, because they have a deficit of their resources, and they would like to use African repositories in order to get something for them. Russia, as a rule, does not need resources. It does not need African oil or African gas. It does not need African gold. So it has the luxury to promote domestic markets. You take, for example, energy. Russia is clearly interested in building electric grids in Africa to make the domestic electricity market in Africa more resilient and more sustainable. And this is an advantage because Russia can afford not to focus on extracting resources and importing resources from Africa. Russia is still a very small player in Africa, but potentially this special role might offer Moscow a lot of benefits in future.
So, Mike, go ahead,
Don't
please.
forget that South Africa is the member of BRICS.
Yes.
This gave certain leverage for Russia.
For Russia. So, on this issue in terms of Russia's African policy, how do you see it, syncing with, or how does it see it in confrontation or cooperation with interest of this part of the world in Africa?
Well, it's a very interesting question. Personally, I think that there is a lot of potential synergy between the Russian engagement and the involvement of Gulf states in Africa. Africa is a big place, and everyone can take a bite out of the growing Africa potential. But that really depends on the ability of Russia to get engaged into multilateral development projects in the African continent. I would say that today Russia is not particularly strong in putting together these multilateral projects. Even if you look at China, China is engaged in a couple of such projects together with a number of EU nations. And definitely China can explore its comparative advantages, especially in infrastructure projects in Africa. Russia is not that experienced, but it can still get involved into some partnerships together with Gulf states, maybe together with India. It cannot do it right now together with the European Union, and I doubt that it can do it with the United States in any foreseeable future, but there are new actors that are getting quite engaged in Africa, including, for example, Turkey, and Russia can learn from Ankara, and maybe it can work together with Turkey on a number of select African projects.
Before I turn the floor to the audience for questions, any other additional comments? Any which you would like to make?
Two things. First, I hear my friend Andre, but I think he's put a little bit of a, to my mind anyway, a positive spin on Russia's Africa policy. I mean, from what's available in the press, from Wagner to the current Africa Corps, it's quite extractive focus. Exactly. And I'm not totally comfortable with the green energy grid thing. But one other thing, Rhonda, which I think is really important, just before we kind of close it out or go to questions, is I think we need to talk a bit about Russia's perception that it's at war with the West and at war with NATO, because we haven't really touched on that yet. And I think that Putin and the Russian elite correctly perceive that they are at war, in a sense, with the United States and with NATO for providing weapons to Ukraine. But it's taken on a different, the guts of the issue is this, that Russia, I think credibly, it's alleged, but I think credibly, has pursued a hybrid war against Europe. We've seen the incidents, 20 Russian drones over Poland, more drones in Europe. I don't think we really know where they're from. Allegations of arson, of cyber attacks, even of assassination in Germany, of the leader of Rheinmetall, the big German arms firm. And I bring that up because I think we're kind of at an inflection point, because there have been, FT articles, which I think are correct, that NATO is going to begin to push back. Armed reconnaissance drones, buildups across parts of the Russian-Finnish border where Russian deployments are weak. much looser rules of engagement for NATO pilots, shooting down hopefully just Russian drones and not Russian planes. But we're at a point right now where I think that Russian perception, more than ever before, risks some kind of kinetic interaction between Russia and NATO. Now, I know how scared President Putin and cautious the Russian state has been about that, but I think we're on an action and reaction cycle, to quote the late, great Robert Jervis, political scientist, that I worry about, and I don't think it's getting the attention it deserves. I just wanted to throw that out there, so thanks.
Do you worry about that?
Yeah, look, Cliff, I could number several assassinations on the Russian soil. Generals.
By Europeans? By Americans?
By Ukrainians, but they
right, but that's different.
It's a battlefield.
Join forces with European allies, attack against our strategic planes. It was engineered by American intelligence.
Wait. American intelligence targeting Russian officials?
No, American intelligence provided to Ukraine, permitted them to attack Russian strategic carriers.
But that's not an assassination, okay.
I mean planes.
Okay.
It's attack against one of the triad.
It has a lot of legal implication when you talk about assassination.
So it's not, Russian is terrible as you painted it. It's vice versa. And today we are facing overreaction of Europeans, I guess, because for 30 years, Europe were clear strategic free rider.
Wait, okay. But I used the word alleged before everything I said about Russia. So I'm not here to portray Russia as terrible. What I'm here to do is help us all understand Russia and try to prevent an escalation of some kind. I don't know whether those reports are true or not. But I think the action and reaction dynamic is really worrisome.
Of course,
that's my
I
point.
agree 100%.
That's my point. Okay.
Andrei, would you like to comment on this last point?
Well, let me say that indeed we have a hybrid war, and I think it is dangerous. We can see an escalation at any given point. Escalation management seems to be the name of the game right now. If we can move along the ladder of escalation down, not up, that would already be a major accomplishment. And definitely we can only hope that within the next couple of months we will see a de-escalation process leading to a change in the dynamics of the conflict. We cannot take it for granted, but nevertheless I think we might stay hopeful that we are already approaching a tipping point in this fratricidal conflict, and that the end of the conflict is not that far away from us. But again, this is my assessment of the situation, which is biased and in many ways self-serving.
The conflict resolution practitioner in me is just pushing me to ask a follow-up question on potential off-ramps, but I'm going to stop and I'm going to turn it over to the audience, and I have Dr. Joseph Bahouth. Joe?
What should I do? Okay. Thank you, Randa. I think it was a very interesting panel, especially when you brought the issue of China and this triangle between the US, China, and Russia. A quick question about that. The impression that we could have, and maybe I'm wrong, is that potentially, in fact, the new bipolarity, if there is some, is going to be China-US in the future. In the meantime, you have a sort of boxer, Russia, that is filling the show, but without the means of being one of the superpowers. What would be potentially once we reach the situation of bipolarity between China and Russia and the US, what will be the posture or the reaction of Russia in this triangle? Where would it side, if it sides somewhere?
Professor Dinkin.
I share your view that there is some chances for the new bipolarity of the 21st century. It's already visible in the northern Eurasia. I mean confrontation between Europe and Russia. It's visible. I wouldn't say that China is already joined this confrontation, but with certain efforts such as secondary sanctions, China could move towards this direction. And this is a very unhappy situation. Secondary sanctions, they brought, it's completely unexpected, it brought New Delhi closer to Beijing. They recently re-established the direct flights, and they made several positive statements about each other, which we did not observe during recent 2 decades. So dynamics is rather fast, and the challenge of this new polarity, new bipolarity, I guess it's real.
Dr. Paul Saunders.
Thank you. Thank you. And very nice to see you, if only on video, Andrei Kortunov. So I want to ask kind of a tough question of our Russian friends. We have a big focus today on AI, which I don't recall hearing come up so far during our session here. So I'm going to read a few sentences from President Putin, from some remarks he gave in 2018. And then I'd like your sense of how Russia is doing on AI and whether it's lived up to the challenge that he sets out. So Putin says in 2018, the speed of technological progress is accelerating sharply. It is rising dramatically. Those who manage to ride this technological wave will surge far ahead. Those who fail to do this will be submerged and drown in this wave. Technological lag and dependence translate into reduced security and economic opportunities of the country and ultimately the loss of its sovereignty. This is the way things stand now. This lag inevitably weakens and erodes human potential because new jobs, modern companies, and an attractive life will develop in other more successful countries where young, educated, talented people will go. That was President Putin's statement 7 years ago about the challenge facing Russia. So the question is, did Russia use the last 7 years well? Is Russia in a position to be an AI leader?
Andrei, would you like to take this question?
Again, my take on that is that already when Putin made this statement, there was a clear understanding in Russia that Russia cannot advance artificial intelligence in all of its dimensions. It's too big a task for a country like Russia. So arguably the decision was made to focus on specific dimensions of artificial intelligence that were particularly important for Moscow. And as you might guess, Russia has focused primarily on the military applications of AI. And in this field, arguably, Russia has made a lot of progress. I would also venture to say that over the last 7 years, they achieved a lot in digitalizing the governance system in Russia. And right now, in this particular area, Russia is advanced more than many of neighboring countries. But I think it is hardly possible for a country like Russia to come up with its comprehensive AI ecosystem similar to what China has or similar to what the United States and its allies are developing. So Russia will have to be very selective in this area, and I think on many other issues it will have to rely on China. I think this is a reality that is not likely to be changed anytime soon. Of course, if Russia had better relations with the West, it could afford to mix the Western and the Chinese components of AI. But right now, it doesn't have this luxury, so it will have to rely on China, at least in my view.
May I?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
I'm disagree because we are currently developing two competitive models of AI. One is the model of Sber, second model of Yandex. We have no other choice because we have shortages of the labor force. One case in Moscow, there is 5 million rentgenology checkups a year, and there was scarcity of experts. They were brought from provinces, not anymore, because today the 70% of diagnoses made by AI, and they are rather perfect. Digitalization of government services, unbelievable. Banking services digitalization. You know, when Europeans came to Moscow, they are very much surprised. So I would not say that maybe we would not develop this ecosystem, but practical implications, there is a lot of demand for that.
Mr. Hani Findakli.
Thank you very much, and thanks for this excellent discussion. I appreciate the different perspectives that's been offered here. My question is that on the assumption that all wars come to an end, does the panel believe that Russia and President Putin will get better terms under President Trump or under a successor administration? A related but a slightly longer term question, I'd like to get a perspective of what the panel thinks of what Russia would look like, say 10, 20, 30 years from now, post-Putin.
Cliff, would you like to?
Sure. I mean, I think Trump's as good as it gets.
At least from the American perspective, do you think Russia will get better terms
No,
under Trump?
that's what I mean.
Yeah.
I don't think that any conceivable president, look, Trump's a real outlier in his view of Russia. He's kind of just out of it on the American political spectrum. He's not part of the consensus that Andre talked about. You know, he likes Putin, he kind of likes Russia. So I kind of think it's kind of now or never if Russia's going to cut a deal. You know, the second question is, I think Russia's quite a stable place. I think that if Putin were to pass from the scene, a Putin-like figure would emerge. You know, I anyway don't think that Russia's very prone to Putin's mortality. Let me leave it there.
So quickly, before I also ask our Russian colleagues to answer this question, these two questions. So building on your question, on your point about potential or the scenario of a kinetic action between NATO and Russia, I mean between NATO and Russia, what are possible off-ramps in the interim that could de-escalate tensions?
Dialogues that aren't happening. I mean, there's a lot that's not clear at all. I mean, this is what I really was trying to emphasize to my friend Alexander about the drone incident, about what's going on with drones over European airports. That there's just a lot that's not clear. You know, European governmental colleagues of mine just expressed their lack of clarity. It's clarifying perceptions that is really important, and those discussions just aren't happening and aren't on the verge of happening. That's the main thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. There were many track 1.5, track 2 US-Russia dialogue. Most of them are gone.
Even you aren't doing them.
Huh?
Even you aren't doing them, right?
Yeah.
I guess it's necessary to open the dialogue. There is some small steps towards renewing the Russia-Germany dialogue. I guess in case of these drones over Belgium, it's better to pick up the phone and make a call, because I could not imagine who could send from Russia drones over Belgium and for what purpose. The drones are in a scarce supply, you know where, but to waste them for Belgium, it's some stupid idea.
So the question about terms, does Russia think they can get better terms for an end state in Ukraine under Mr. Brandt than future presidents?
Well, who knows, because initially there was some optimism. Maybe because 47 presidents do not understand the deepness of this conflict, the history. You know, demise of empires is much more complicated than the rule-based order. Look at the British Empire, look at the relation between Pakistan and Indians. In some extent, this is true about former Soviet Union. Look at Karabakh, because Bolsheviks, they draw their borders without any attention to ethnicity or religious. It was just short-term political necessity. Sykes-Picot borders were much better than the borders which were drawn by Bolshevik. And when presidents start to understand this complicity, I hope he would be more, how should I say, wise.
Andrei, the last question is yours. How will Russia look like in 10, 15, 20 years?
It's a big question, but let me try to be brief to the extent I can. First of all, Russia will be a large power, blessed with significant territory and abundance of natural resources. And Russia's commodities will still matter in the global economy. Even if drill baby drill becomes obsolete, then dig baby dig will still be with us. So Russia can play an important role in serving global markets, but also in participating in climate change management, in providing for biological diversity and environment protection. Second, Russia will continue to be a major exporter of human capital. If you look around, you'll see graduates from Russian universities are working in various places, from Los Angeles to Shanghai, from London to Singapore, and that will continue to be the case. I think that Russia can still generate human capital, which is an important role to play. And finally, Russia will continue to be a global power, not only because of these power projection capabilities that President Putin likes to demonstrate, like Burevestnik and Poseidon, but also because of its ability to maintain relations with practically all emergent centers of power in the world, especially in the global south, because of its engagement with multilateral institutions. So Russia will be an important player. However, I think that there are some challenges ahead, problems looming on the horizon. And again, these are more or less evident challenges and risks that should be taken into consideration. First of all, Russia will continue to experience demographic problems. And I think that all the efforts of the government to cope with the problem notwithstanding, definitely it will be a permanent pain in the neck. It could probably be a result in a radical way if Russia is ready to turn itself into a frontier state like the United States of the 19th century. But it is hard to believe that Russia will follow this path, given rather strong anti-migrant sentiments within the Russian population. Second, Russia will have to reinvent its economic model. Its current model was put in place some 20, 25 years ago. It turned out to be quite resilient and sustainable in times of crisis. Its performance over the last couple of years was quite remarkable, but it does not generate a lot of incentives, a lot of drivers of growth, especially once the world is shifting to the fourth industrial revolution, which will create new opportunities, but also new economic risks for Russia. And finally, I think Russia will have to fix relations with its neighbors, and that remains an unfinished business for Russia. It has to gradually build a beltway of constructive relations with neighboring countries with which it now has many problems, from Baltic states in the west to Japan in the east. A lot will depend, I think, on the quality of the state governance, but I think that we can look at the future of Russia, if you take a long-term future with cautious optimism, provided that the Russian leadership will stand up to confront the challenges and the risks that it is likely to encounter within the next 10 or 20 years down the road.
Join me in thanking our esteemed panelists for this excellent and very insightful discussion. Thank you very much.